was something else I wanted to mention. So he was born on the 11th of August in 1902. His mother died in 1908 when he was 6, and his father moved back to Stoke Newington, living at 32 Aden Grove and later at 201 Albion Road. As an adult, he lived at 49 Lordship Road until 1946, but he did still have close links with Stoke Newington for about 30 years after that. In 1915, his father served in World War I and was subsequently awarded 2 medals. Meanwhile, his uncle Philip was interned at Alexandra Palace, which was then a camp for German and Austrian enemy aliens. There is actually an exhibition that Alexandra Palace, if anyone is interested, hosting in August, and that's on precisely that subject, and also the Belgian refugees that were interned there. So we'll get on to the very first album now and the actual pictures, and that's the inscription when they lived at 201 Albion Road. So this is Queen Elizabeth's Walk, and if you can see, how do I do the pointer in there?
The button in the middle.
On
that
the
one.
middle.
Yeah.
This, if ever you're walking down Queen Elizabeth's Walk, if you have a look there, that's where a 1960s block called Drake Croft now stands. That was originally number 12, but presumably it fell into dereliction and was pulled down. At this time, the road gave way to the footway some 75 metres further north than now. Though the actual bollards in the picture are long gone, the current ones are adjacent to Lordship Estate. And relating to Queen Elizabeth's Walk, at that time his grandparents lived at number 68. This is the first and perhaps one of the most beautiful pictures, I would say. We all know this, I expect, St Mary's New Church, designed by George Gilbert Scott and consecrated in 1858, the spire being added by John Aldred Scott in 1890. The picture at the bottom is Frederick Wirth's father, who married his second wife, Florence Helen Theobald, but that's with his first wife, who died very young, in part due to having the son. And this is one of their first homes, 201 Albion Road. It's actually taken from what was then the southern curve of Hawksley Road. I don't know if anyone knows Hawksley Road, but it actually used to start off at the north of Albion Road, curve around and then rejoin. Where the photo is taken from is where now the Hawksley Court Estate now stands. It was bombed in World War II, hence it being a much shorter street now. And Frederick Wirth lived here, Frederick Arthur Wirth lived here with his father from around 1818 to 1820. He later lived in a shared house at 49 Lordship Road until around 1946, and his father continued to live there until the late 1920s with his second wife, Florence Helen Theobald. She was also a Stoke Newington resident. I show my credentials there. This I don't have a great deal to say. I don't know why he took it. I've never found a link, but this is a house on Hawksley Road. But it's quite a nice picture. And sometimes you don't have much to say. But those houses are still there. A mere exchange messages one night trying to identify exactly where they were. I think we originally thought it might be Woodley Road, didn't we?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. But having been on Google Street View, I do think it's Hawksley. Again, the next picture, I don't know why it was taken, but it's just one to show you. Raleigh Memorial Chapel. And here we come to an important link with my father. As I say, he moved out of Stoke Newington in the 1940s, but he continued to work at the Methodist Church that used to stand on the site where the modern building is. The modern building, if you know it, on the corner of Green Lanes, is actually the third incarnation of the church. So that's the church that used to stand there. It did have a steeple, and I will come on to that. The church originally had a spire, but after storm damage it was removed in 1920. A lot of the congregation actually thought it looked better without a spire. Conversely, St Mary's New Church had been built without a spire. having one added in 1890, leading to the rhyme, Stoke Newington's a funny place with lots of funny people. Thomas Jackson built a church, but he could not build a steeple. And Mr. Wirth, at the term I've been corrected by my mother, Mr. Wirth held office from the early 1920s and continued to do so even after he'd left Stoke Newington in the 1940s up until he left London in 1967. And by holding office, it's not as officious as it sounds. It was church treasurer, circuit steward, Sunday school teacher, etc. But unfortunately, that building is no more. But that is the subject of a different presentation that you might get to see one day, and lots of other photos. So this is Park Lane, renamed Clissold Crescent in 1937. You can see a milk delivery hand cart. I had to do a little bit of research to work out exactly what on earth this thing was. But, oops. Yeah, this is what you used to have your milk delivered in. And just over here, you can see Park Lane Bridge crossing the New River, which is with what is possibly a warning sign. And I'll come into why I think that might be, but that diamond-shaped thing there. So again, a quote from the story of Green Lane's Wesleyan Church. The writer has heard Mr. Geeky tell of 2 attempts at suicide which have occurred there within his recollection. We know also of an instance in which a boy tumbled near the chapel and narrowly escaped drowning. As we know, that was demolished and covered over. Whoops. And all that remains of it, if ever you're walking that area, is a plaque commemorating it. We don't know exactly who put that up or why they put it up. That slide was covering a little section of the New River, and we'll now come on to a New River walk in the 1900s, and there's just a little map there from 1895, a little bit before my father's time, but it shows where some of the pictures that you'll see were taken. So we start off at Clissold House, and this would have been when the New River actually ran along Church Street. And where it was taken from, on this side of the New River, there is no longer that fencing there. Then we move further north, and the New River Lordship Road Bridge. I think, from having looked at maps again, this is from the bridge on Lordship Road, looking east towards the East Reservoir on the right-hand side. New River Woodbury Down, and in those days you can see a little bit on the right-hand side some of the old mansion houses that were there before the estate was built. And it's looking towards the Ivy House sluice gate and the cut leading into the East Reservoir, and it's believed to have been taken from Woodbury Down Bridge, and I'll just show you a map. So believed to have been taken there, and again that area is all being developed again for better or for worse. And finally, a little bit out of the boundary of Stoke Newington, but this is the last part of what appears to have been a walk in the early 1900s. That is not 100% sure, but we think that's a section as if you're going down towards Sainsbury's home base, just before you get to the northern part of Finsbury Park. And that was at that time called the Green Lanes Bridge. Speaking of Manor House, again, it's a little bit off track, but Greater Stoke Newington. Here's Manor House before the Underground arrived in the 1930s. And what I found out is the Piccadilly line opened as the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton Railway in 1906, but its northern terminus at that point was Finsbury Park. It was only in the 1930s that it was extended up to Manor House and all the way up to Cockfosters. This is the second album in the collection. A little bit blurred, unfortunately, but it's still quite a nice view. And am I correct in that, Amir? For Reginald Truelove?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the one.
And as Amir has said, that was where the houses known as Church Row would have stood. It's quite amazing to me, really. My father would actually have remembered those houses. Again, a bit of a blurred picture, but still quite a nice one here. and it was written about at the time in Architect and Building News, October 1937, as a good example of an interwar complex of town hall and assembly hall with particularly good materials and fine detailing. We'll come on next to a few photos of Clissold Park, but one thing again to mention is that some of you will probably have seen Amir's research into the saving of Clissold Park and the 1,200 strong petition to save it. It was when Amir posted that online that I found out that my great-great-uncle Valentine, one of the original immigrants from Germany, was one of the signatories and indeed was buried in Abbey Park. So that's him on the petition. That was quite amazing to find out. I haven't found any others yet, but I'm sure I will. And just a view of Clissold Park Rose Gardens. Some of these, I'm afraid, I don't necessarily know the dates, but I think it's obvious the kind of era they are, 1920s, 1930s. Another picture here, the bowling green and pavilion. I think the bowling green is still there, actually. Not as a bowling green, but it's a dog-free area. And the next one, me and Amir had quite a lot of to and fro about the location, but I think we both agreed this is Clissold Park looking southeast from near the Beckmere Lake, so as you go in from Green Lane to the parkkeeper's house. And of course we know those two lakes now as the Beckmere and Runts Lakes, but back in those days they were simply known as fish ponds. And come on to another album. This is the final actual album. Then there's some miscellaneous photos. I will go through it quite quickly because I think I'm approaching time. But this is actually a view of that southern section of Hawksley Road that no longer exists. And it's taken from 201 Albion Road, if you recall, where my father lived with his father and stepmother. But that view you can't see anymore, it's where the Horticulture estate is. And this shows where the bomb damage was. So in World War II, so this section still exists, but this southern section doesn't. That's where the bombs were and destroyed those houses, and this is where 201 Albion Road was, so the view is looking that way. It's quite an unlucky street corner, really. And this is the rear view from the house, and this is actually more interesting than I thought. This is actually more interesting than I thought at first. It's actually is a view of the nurseries that were on what was known as Church Path, and those nurseries, if I can find it, you can see on the map of 1915 that there were nurseries that stood there, and I will focus on this for a short while. Church Park was a medieval bridleway running across Glebland, and it survived as a route from Church Street to Newington Green until the 1960s, when Stoke Newington sixth form was built. At the time of the photograph, nurseries and greenhouses are shown on the map, as you can see, and they're likely to have been Albion nurseries. Stoke Newington resident Shirley Hibbard wrote in Gardener's magazine in 1863, first in importance among the nurseries of Stoke Newington was the Albion Nursery in Albion Road. It's preserved an open space and temple of flora in the midst of a district where, the builders have been lately eating up the land and transforming trees into houses with a vigour of which needs to be seen to be believed. This nursery carries back the memories of the days when Stoke Newington was one of the great homes of floriculture, where growers of orchids and ferns and alpines and dahlias and carnations and auricales, I don't think I'm saying that right, were as thickly strewn as we now see in the villas with 10 square feet of garden attached. But it does show you how, we talk about Stoke Newington changing, and it has constantly changed, and there's been similar outcries from people. After this point, in the sort of late 30s, there aren't so many photos, and I'll come on to why. This was the interior of Green Lane's Methodist Church. as I say, no longer exists. And the reason why there aren't so many photos here is so Frederick Arthur Wirth voluntarily joined the army to serve in World War II. He made this choice as he felt that his peers with wives and children were serving in the armed forces, and as a single man with no children, it would be wrong not to do otherwise, as he had nothing to lose and no one to leave behind. During and after the war, he took less photos of Stoke Newington, having moved out in 1946. He continued, however, to hold office in various positions at Green Lanes Methodist Church, as Trust Treasurer, Church Steward, Tottenham and Stoke Newington Church Steward, and Sunday School teacher. But even after he left Stoke Newington and still worked at the church and visited various friends, there were a few photos taken. So that is Green Lanes Methodist Church, and that is in the early 1950s. You heard me talk about Paradise Row. There was actually, you can just about see it there, there was a row of quite grand houses called Paradise Place. They are gone now as well. I think I've got a date on that. Yep, so they were 132 to 144 Green Lanes, and they were known as Paradise Place. They were built in 1829, where they were prime and Lido houses, the Burma Court estate now stands, and that estate was built in the 1950s, so this must have been shortly before. Rather nice car though. This was the interior of the old church. That was a harvest festival, and the church actually did quite a lot of outreach work in the community, youth clubs, helping vulnerable people, giving advice and drop-in centres for single mothers. So they did do a lot of good work. And we'll come on to the final few now. That's a view of Newington Green in 1950. It's quite a nice view, but what you might need pointing out is there, number 42, Holland House. It's some sort of a restaurant at the moment, a sort of curved building with red bricks. Holland House was built around about 1700, and it was demolished in 1954. Probably named after Edward Holland, who bought it in 1870. It was a three-storied, five-bay red brick house, and after it was demolished, it was replaced by factory buildings. Apparently, by all accounts, in 1983, those factory buildings stood empty behind the original 18th century iron gates and railings of the old house. And I think this is spring. It's just a rather nice view. Some of you might recognise it. Looking up Green Lanes towards what's the name of the house? All Port.
White House.
Hmm?
The White House.
Yeah, the White House. Looking up towards the White House. I think it's actually before that estate that they've recently pulled down to put up expensive flats. On the right-hand side is where the tower block used to stand. So I don't think, judging by the picture, that's actually been built yet. And we'll just come on to a few views of Clissold Park. So that would be Clissold Park, I think, in the early 1960s. Clissold Deer Park enclosure. Just something interesting about the Deer Park enclosure, though. Clissold Park was one of the first London parks where bird and animal life was specifically provided for educational purposes. Red deer were first introduced into Clissold Park a year after it opened, and as the herd grew, red deer from Clissold were actually sent to 4 other London parks: Marion Park, I've never heard of that, Victoria Park, Golders Green and Battersea. And just another, I think there's another couple of views of Clissold. And that's from the corner of Church Street and Green Lanes. And that might be Stoke Newington Football Club, and maybe intended that at one point. And just come on to the last couple of slides. So this is possibly the last ever wedding held at that church, Green Lanes. I won't reveal the person's details, but that's in around about 1968. But yeah, probably the last ever wedding. The bride is now a widow, and she lives in Stoke Newington. One thing that's maybe of interest, I don't know if you can see there, you can actually see on the lower ground floor some windows, and that was actually schoolrooms. And interestingly, in World War I, it was staffed by some members of the congregation for the local community as a form of air raid shelters. The church did survive for almost 100 years through 2 world wars, but dry rot and vandalism destroyed it, and it was burnt down by vandals. When that church was pulled down, there was a collection for a new church and youth group. So the borough had changed quite a well. Stoke Newington Borough had been absorbed into Hackney, and there was much more of a need for youth outreach work, etc. This was actually at the stone laying ceremony for what was the new church, which was a red brick building, which has since been pulled down. And I will come on to the last slide now and embarrass someone in the audience with this. Mr. Wirth moved out of Stoke Newington in 1967. He had just got married to someone called Sylvia Blagborough. They married in 1964, and in 67 they moved out of London to start a family, me. He passed away in 1979, but his wife survives him. She's moved back to Stoke Newington in 1999, and she still lives, and she's at the talk tonight. And that rounds up my talk for the evening. Thank you.